All right. Who would like to share with me what was discussed in your breakout groups as it pertains to the thesis of the text? What is the thesis of the reading?
For me, one big takeaway from the speech was this idea that um, people of African descent are not living this so-called American dream, but instead the American nightmare.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else? The thesis of the reading. Go ahead, Gianna.
Um, I would say it's how like America is like built on like a democratic nation freedom, and that is not the case for African people. So it's very hypocritical for us to have those values when everyone does not experience that.
Perfect. So American hypocrisy in a sense, right? Perfect. All right. So who would like to discuss why Malcolm felt more at home in Ghana than he did within the United States? All right, go ahead, Valerie.
Sorry, I have to be a little bit quiet. But what I got from it was that the reason he felt more at home was because that is his home, simply put. Like that's where he belonged. Like he was pointing out like that African people, they did migrate willingly at one point, but the major way that they migrated was by force. And it was because they were taken from their homes and they were robbed of not just their culture, but everything that they had ever known. And what he's saying that he doesn't know America. America doesn't know him either. America doesn't care to know him, doesn't care to know African American ancestry, doesn't care to know anything about them. So why would he be at home in a place that doesn't care about him?
Very
His
good.
home is Africa. His home is where he was because that's where he was valued. They even gave him a name. I'm forgetting what it was, but it was like the name was that you're home again.
Yeah, Omawali.
Like he felt home.
Yeah,
That's why.
perfect. Thank you, Valerie. Who would like to speak to this idea that Ghana was the most progressive state in Africa? I'm looking at the chat. Amelia mentioned that Malcolm mentions that regardless of the language barrier, the Americas was to blame for that. He also knew his community was in Ghana and would understand his obstacles and welcome him. So they understood the obstacles that he faced as a diasporic African, and he was still welcome. Thank you, Amelia. But again, what about this notion that Ghana is the most progressive nation in Africa? Why did he state that Ghana was the most progressive nation in Africa?
Because of the leaders and presidents
Yep,
that they restored the African image.
perfect. Was Joseph or Noelle, were you gonna mention something?
I was gonna say about the same thing. And well, in America, when we see that they're restoring back their image, for example, on the past video that we watched, Black Wall Street, Americans like try to destroy that.
Perfect. All right, bet. So what I'm going to try to do within my lecture is provide like a context, excuse me, to Malcolm X because this speech is kind of later into his life, so I kind of want to provide a background for you. Um, I also want to talk about some of my experiences in Ghana as it pertains to this notion of being welcome and being home, and then you know problematize further this notion of being American. But Malcolm X, or Malcolm Little, as he um, was born to Earl Little, was his father. His father was a follower of Marcus Garvey. So when we talked about last week that Garvey was able to build the largest mass movement of Africans within the United States, Malcolm X's father was one of the members of this movement. And when he went to, because of this notion of self-determination, things of that nature, early on, Malcolm enjoyed a fairly middle-class lifestyle. They didn't really have to want for things. They were economically secure and what have you. Eventually, they would move to Nebraska, and because of his Garvey affiliations and spreading the message of Marcus Garvey, their house would get firebombed by the Ku Klux Klan. And eventually, Malcolm X's father would be murdered, hit in the back of the head and laid out on train tracks. Now, as I mentioned, they were a fairly middle-class family, so they had the ability to provide a life insurance policy or take out a life insurance policy on Malcolm's father. But due to the anti-Black sentiments within the society, the insurance company denied them the life insurance, right? They said that he committed suicide. So again, he was struck in the back of the head in one location and then drugged to the train tracks and laid out in the train tracks, right? So how logical is it to strike yourself in the back of the head, right? And then you like walk further a few more feet and then lay out on the train tracks. Like that's a very odd way to commit suicide out of all of the ways to do so, right? But this is the justification that was used to deny the family their insurance policy. Now, I want to say Malcolm had maybe about 6 or 7 siblings. So they were a very large family, and the father was the premier breadwinner of the family. Now, with the breadwinner being eliminated from the home, you don't have, so you go out and get by means that you have affordable to you. So to eat dinner, Malcolm then would start stealing shit, right? Due to these activities, state intervened and they removed Malcolm and his siblings from the home, placing them in foster care. Now, the act of placing her children in foster care effectively drew Malcolm's mother into the insane asylum. So now you have his father murdered, his mother in the insane asylum, and his siblings spread out amongst foster care, right? Now, as the story has it, right, he experiences all type of racism and discrimination within the foster care system. Eventually lands with his sister in Boston. While in Boston, he's kind of introduced into what we'll call the underworld, right? Selling a little weed on the side, what have you. But what he does stumble upon in Boston is working on the train. And through working on the train, he travels to Harlem, right? And he falls in love with the Harlem night scene, and he begins a more deeper, intimate connection with illicit activity. So from selling weed to selling more exotic drugs, engaged in some pimping, running numbers, right? And also robbing. He did a lot of theft. So this naturally lands him in jail. Go ahead, Michelle.
I thought what also landed him in jail was that him and his friend was dating these 2 white girls, and they got caught stealing with those white girls, and those white girls, they told the police, yeah, we weren't really part of it. They dragged us along. They even raped us, and that's what really landed them in jail.
I don't know about the rape claims, but yes, he was doing robbing of houses with 2 white women, and naturally his charges were his and his homeboy Shorty's. Their charges was a lot more severe than that of the white women, right? So yes, that is true, but I didn't hear anything about the claims of rape. But the point of the story is, right, so now that he's been incarcerated, but through incarceration, he is introduced into the Nation of Islam. And it's through the Nation of Islam that he gets kind of politicized and begins to kind of move his life in a different direction. some of the philosophies of the Nation of Islam are very much aligned with some of the philosophies of Marcus Garvey. So with his father being a Garveyite, the message of the Nation of Islam made sense, right? Don't eat pork, staying away from cigarettes and alcohol, things of that nature. This idea that they will create a separate state within the United States for Black folks, right? So part of that idea was carving out about 6 or 7 states in the South and making those 6 or 7 states be exclusively Black states, right? So these are some of the ideas that of the Nation of Islam that Malcolm was attracted to. They had a very uncanny capacity to point out the contradictions in those who in the white race, right? And this state that they build up called America, right? So these are the things that really drawn Malcolm to the Nation of Islam. He rose to prominence very quickly, becoming the minister of the Nation Temple number 7 in Harlem. And part of this is because he had connections to the Harlem underworld, right? So I mentioned that he sold weed or what have you. So all of the jazz musicians in Harlem would go to Malcolm to get their treat, right? The likes of, he was very friendly with the likes of Billie Holiday. He was close friends with Red Fox, right? So a lot of these major social figures of the 1920s were Malcolm's associates before he converted to the Nation of Islam. So while in the Nation of Islam, he has a falling out with the Nation of Islam, and he forms his own organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity and Muslim Mosques Incorporated. But during his falling out, he has the ability to travel to Mecca to do his Hajj. And through his travels to Mecca, he also gets to visit Africa. And this is where we pick up on the speech that we've read. And we've learned about the conditions of Black folks within the confines of America for the past few weeks, right? But take that into consideration also with what you've heard just right now about who Malcolm is and his experiences. And think about that, how that will shape the way that he would look at this place called America, right? Father murdered, mother drove into the insane asylum, incarcerated, right? All of the litany of racism and anti-Blackness that he experienced through the foster care, right? It would make sense as that he would paint himself or understand himself in the experiences of African people as being victims of America. Because quite literally, he was a victim of America. One of the things that he famously says in his autobiography, if a state institution has ever drawn apart a Black family or destroyed a Black family, excuse me, it destroyed mine. Think about it. Father murdered, right? They had the wherewithal to take out an insurance policy. Not a lot of Black folks could do that in those times, right? And due to the fact that they were uppity enough to take out an insurance policy, we're going to make sure that that's denied. Forcing him, who has never known anything but comfort, to steal for survival, which effectively places him in foster care and his mother in the insane asylum. Literally, the hands of the state intervened and destroyed his family. So absolutely, I'm going to have a problematic approach to the way that I look at America. And then to have the desire, right, through what you've learned in the Nation of Islam, to kind of carve out this separate Black space. And then to travel to Africa, to a country that has established independence. So when he talks about Kwame Nkrumah is the president of Ghana at the time, and they had overthrown British colonialism to make Ghana an independent, sovereign African nation. But what was fascinating about Ghana and Kwame Nkrumah, he was a Pan-Africanist. He believed, like Marcus Garvey, in this notion of Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. So if you know about the flag of Ghana, it's red, gold, and green with a Black star in the middle of it. And Kwame Nkrumah says the purpose of the Black star is that Ghana will be the first independent African nation of 54 to make up a United States of Ghana. So eventually, if his plan was to come to fruition, there would be 54 Black stars to represent an independent United States of Africa, right? This is what his desire was. And part of that was to allow Africans from the diaspora to come and live in Ghana. Ghana was the first country to offer what's called dual citizenship. So I could be an American citizen and simultaneously be a citizen of Ghana.
Are they still doing that today?
Yes.
Or because
Yeah.
I wanted to do that. I wanted eventually wanted to become a Ghana citizen, but I was afraid if I was afraid that I would need to have a Ghana ancestry in order to join. I mean, in order
No,
to.
you don't. They offer you dual citizenship just for being of African ancestry, period.
Okay.
So these are some of the political underpinnings that make Ghana who it is, that make Malcolm recognize that Ghana is the most progressive state because of these type of philosophies, right? And again, keep in mind that these philosophies are directly in alignment with Marcus Garvey. So for me, when I got off the plane and saw nothing but Black faces everywhere, that's a level of comfortability that you can't really replicate. I haven't had too many experiences, especially being in Southern California, right? Where there's just spaces of all Black folks. And then like on top of that, the Black folks are running shit, right? I would think if anybody been to like the Atlanta airport, that would probably be like the closest proximity that you would get. But and even in the Atlanta airport, right, you're gonna have a lot of people who ain't Black there, right? They're just traveling. Nothing but Black faces. So when he talks about like feeling welcome and feeling at home, I profoundly understand that. And as I kind of come out of this, just the haze of seeing all these Black faces, the next thing I recognize are 3 police officers. Now, being from America, you already have a certain type of association with police. They don't carry Glocks out there. It's like them AK-47 and these long ass batons. Like they're so long they drag on the ground, right? And they're making like a beeline towards me. So I'm like, checking my shit, making sure I have no contraband or nothing on me because I don't know why they're coming over here. When they get to me, welcome home, brother. Welcome home, brother. This is the police, right? Profoundly different exchange with the police than what we would have here. And then as I continue to move through Ghana and continue to interact with the locals there, welcome home, brother. It's glad to have you back. Lost son, welcome back. Ceremonies, welcoming us back home. So this is what he means when he says, I felt much more at home than I do in my so-called home. And it's with this understanding that I consider myself, again, at best, an African in America, not an African American. My situations haven't dictated or predicated that I'm a part of this American project. As he said most astutely, I've been victimized by this American project, but I'm not a part of it. And what he also does a masterful job of pointing out is the hypocrisy in America. The notion that the founding fathers, because they were dissatisfied, were able to defect from Europe, right? And start their own thing, form what's called the New World. Give me liberty or give me death, right? So in other words, if I can't experience my freedom, I'd rather die fighting for it. And he argues like these are the people who are propped up as heroes. But when African people try to do that, they're considered terrorists. And if you think back to to Monday's material, we understand this notion of terrorism very well. So I'll put a pause on it there. We'll open it up for a fishbowl. twice per semester. You could talk about my lecture. You could talk about the reading, or sorry, the reading, or you could read from your journal. Are there any volunteers? And if not, I'll just call that random. I think at most Delilah won. All right, so I'll call that random. Andrew, are you prepared to fishbowl? Yeah. Okay, got you. Thank you. Andrew. Nancy, are you prepared to fishbowl? All right. And Kenyon, are you prepared to fishbowl?
Nah, I think I'll skip this one time.
You say you'll pass?
Yeah.
So you use your one pass for the semester, all right?
All right.
We'll get one more. Julian, are you prepared to fishbowl? Kinda. So what do you want me to do with that?
Do I have a pass option?
Haven't you passed already?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay, so then you got your pass. All right. Joseph, are you prepared to fishbowl? I'm sorry, Joseph Stewart. I know that too.
Sure.
All right. All right. So we'll go in this order. Andrew, Nancy, Joseph. Go ahead, Andrew.
I just want to talk about the reading. So it talked about how like they try to make Africa look bad, and whenever when they're in America, they try to like they get stereotyped Africans by Americans, and it's crazy because not even in their own place, like in Africa, they try to when they try to what does it say? For example, when they said that the president was trying to restore the African image, America didn't like that, and they're trying to like erase that image. So I just wanted to speak on that, how they don't like just leave their culture be.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Nancy?
Yeah, so I would also like to kind of talk about the reading and a little about your lecture. I thought it was interesting about him having a name in, I believe it's Yoruba, um, and how he was really like welcomed back. I thought that was really like, thought it was really cool. Um, and yeah, and it also ties back to him feeling more at home in Ghana than in America. I also wanted to talk a little bit about when you were talking about Americans or white Americans in this case being hypocritical about um, the African people in Ghana and about their wealth, how they really like. I think he talked about having like an incident where he like there was a white American man on a plane or something, and talked about how how they really underestimated the wealth that of the resources that the African folks in Ghana had, and that's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you. Joseph?
I really resonate with that, feeling more at home with like African, like in African setting. So I always, whenever I meet or like I have a lot of African like friends and like acquaintances in like my community. So I always feel um compared to like how I feel at like school, there's like black people, but then when I feel how I feel with like African, just like directly African people, I always feel like um just more not really welcome, but I always feel like I like relate to them more. Just like their not really their values kind of thing, but more like just I don't know. I really know how to describe it, but I understand how he felt with like the the Ghanaian people, and when he went there, and then like at the airport when they welcomed you. I feel like that's pretty accurate representation.
Yeah, I want to kind of swing back to Nancy's point about the wealth of Ghana and the cat on the plane who did not recognize the wealth of Ghana. I mentioned how Kwame Nkrumah was able to overthrow British colonialism and liberate Ghana. Prior to that liberation, Ghana was referred to as the Gold Coast because that's how much gold was in Ghana at the time. And in fact, that's what brought a lot of the Europeans to West Africa was the legend of the gold that was in African soil, right? So when you talk about the tremendous wealth that is in Africa, it's really hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, when you think about the mines and things that are still going on to this day, it speaks to the amount of wealth that's coming out of Africa. All of us have cell phones, iPads, computers, whatever the case may be. None of those would work if it was not for cobalt. This is a mineral that's found strictly in the Congo. And while they're talking about the circumstances in Palestine at a very high level, what they're not talking about is the genocide that's taking place in the Congo because of the extraction of this resource. So again, when you want to talk about the wealth of Africa, these are the things that we don't know about, but firmly situate the power of Africa's wealth. When you talk about all the wars that are going on in places like Sudan, where there's American intervention, it's because of these African resources. Rubber, right? Cocoa, all of these things come out of Africa. All of these resources came out of Africa, build the economic power base for what's called the New World, for what we understand to be the West. Not to be crude, but if you really, really want to talk about it, the stock exchange. What was the first stock to be exchanged in America? What was the first stock that was there were they exchanging in at the start of this country?
Maybe like black people.
Yeah, enslaved Africans. That was the first stock. So when you talk about Wall Street was about the business of enslavement. This is the origins of how this country got its economic base. Where did those African people come from by and large? West Africa. So we don't have to only talk about like the resources that are in the soil, right? It's also the resources of human cargo, people used as a source of labor. So again, when you're talking about the wealth of Africa, it's hard to really comprehend. Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I wanted to make a few comments, but actually, I've been talking a little bit, so sorry for pronouncing your name, Asia or Asia. If you wanted to talk, I saw you raise your hand.
Desire. You're fine. No, I was just gonna say it's really important. I like that you brought up the fact that Palestine, the whole Palestine and Congo thing, because it's not enough media coverage about that. And it's really scary because it's literally the same exact shit that we are dealing uh with the current Palestinian genocide. It all goes back to say what Malcolm said in the speech. Hold on, let me look for it in my notes. I'm sorry. Where he talked about if you want to let the government set up the educational system and educate you in the direction they want you to go in, it just reminded me of how our our current standing, this speech would have been great if it was said now, because our government has this like the American government has a lot more power than I think we can fathom, especially given the fact that they're so heavy on delaying, like they're so heavy on censorship. And as you said, we get our knowledge from our phones, and they're literally killing people from, for I'm sorry, they're literally killing people for these materials. It's just really sad, honestly, that our censor, like the way we see things and the way we advocate for things are shifted by undercover entities or just like vile plans, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys are like
I hear you.
picking up. Yeah, it's really sick. And I feel like uh this speech could have been like, it really would have been helpful for our community as a whole. Because I don't know if you guys have seen, there's this current like the diaspora about Black people talking about, oh, I'm too hood. I don't want to be around the too hood Black people, or I don't. Or do you guys know what I'm talking? It's literally happening as we're speaking, and I feel like that's really another another effect of what he was talking about in this speech, because it's like we've grown we've grown to hate ourselves so much we can't even advocate for the bullshit that we're put through. We can't even see the game that we're being played, and we can't even see it because we hate ourselves so much. They've conditioned us to hate ourselves.
Yeah. Sad but true.
Yeah.
Gilberto?
Yeah, I was just gonna, because I was kind of prepared like for oh, how do I relate it to today's world? Although it wasn't that long ago. I want to kind of speak on this hypocrisy like in America still to this day, especially like now with this war like between Palestine and Israel. I don't want to get into like what that is, but this idea that you're funding a war based on a like this liberty, right? And you're kind of just trying to build this image for everyone else around to see you as this free country. When if you like take a closer look, it's clearly not free, especially like with those Black people in America. Uh, why are you trying to fund this like global war when you can't even like fix something inside? And it just goes to show really how discriminatory it is, how like how racist white America still is. And I want to also speak on this idea of like when Malcolm X talks about camouflaging it via like pretty terms. And I say like pretty terms and pretty institutions because it's the same idea, like whether it's laws or prisons, like yeah, racism is once again just still alive. It's the same thing I was saying last week. And you talk about like cross sourcing, and I could see those like just resonating and repeating like itself through all the sources you give us.
Yeah, I definitely hope so, right? Like, let's start making these connections because even, and this is why I started off the lecture talking about how Malcolm X's father was a Garveyite, right? And this idea of self-determination and self-sufficiency that we've seen in Black Wall Street and the MOVE movement is also picked up on by Malcolm, right? And this is why he's so attracted to what's going on in Ghana, because it's an example of this self-sufficiency and self-determination that he's familiar with. So absolutely. Gabriel, what you thinking?
I just think it's kind of crazy how it all connects. Like I was thinking about, was Garvey the one who was like, "Oh, we should focus on maybe going back to Africa at some point"? And then
Yes.
when I heard about like Malcolm X, and he kind of adopted those same ideals,
Yeah.
I just thought it was overall interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Good call out. It's been argued that like you could look at the Black radical movement in like two different branches or two different factions. And oftentimes the figurehead to one faction is Marcus Garvey, right? And from Marcus Garvey, you get the likes of Malcolm X, you get the likes of the Black Panther Party and what have you, right? So Garvey is looked at as a figurehead for like the Black radical, Black national tradition. So that's a very good call out, Gabriel, to kind of begin to make those connections. one of the things I want to talk about before we start to begin to close out, what makes Malcolm X profoundly important. His desire before he was assassinated was to take the United States before the United Nations for crimes against humanity. Think about this. So how things are supposed to work, right, is that you have the United States, right, but then you have like the United Nations as this body that makes sure globally no one's being taken advantage of, so to speak, right? So the idea is like, we can't take the United States to court to the United States. They're not going to vote or not going to, swing justice in our favor. So we need to go to authority above them. Think about it this way. There's the human rights violations that are taking place against the the Ukrainian people, right? And think about how the world rallied around Ukraine because of Russia violating their human rights. So the idea is African descended people within the United States also have a history of having their human rights violated. So it gives us the same cause to go to the likes of the United Nations to seek for a form of justice. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to carry that plan out because he was assassinated before he was able to do so. But the brilliance of that plan. So let me ask you this. I'm not talking about the politics of the movement. I'm talking strictly in terms of terminology, right? The term Black Lives Matter, what does that mean? Strictly the term Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. What does that mean?
That Black lives do in fact matter?
Correct. So Gabriel, let me ask you this. For that to be a call of action, what does that implicitly insinuate?
It insinuates that they're not getting fair treatment. People are dying.
So
and systemic racism.
Yes. So in fact, and I think you're more spot on in the sense that people are dying. So another way to articulate that, and you're absolutely correct, Gabriel, it's saying that in this society, Black lives don't matter, which means we have to state the fact that they do or they should. Y'all with me? So let me ask you this. Bless you. Name for me some civil rights. State for me examples of civil rights. What are some of your rights as citizens? Go
Freedom
ahead.
of speech.
Freedom of speech, absolutely.
The
What
right
else?
to vote.
Right to vote. I knew you was gonna say that, Michelle. What else?
The right of representation. Is it a taxation without representation? Something like that?
Yes. Well,
Something
that's a
like
little
that.
complicated, but yes. But so
Yeah.
you all understand what these civil rights are.
Yes.
What's a human right?
Human rights?
What is an example of a human right?
We're able to press charges and sue. Unfortunately, some of our ancestors,
That's more of a civil right, though. That's the right
wait.
that
Oh,
man has.
that's.
Civil right. Mhm. Human right.
Can you give an example?
I'm asking y'all that. Help her out.
The right to live.
Dang.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. But the right to live, the right to breathe. I would argue the right to have safe food and safe water. I would argue a right to health care. I would argue a right to housing. But let's stay with the first one, the right to live. If Black folks had the right to live, there would be no need for a Black Lives Matter movement.
Or
So
civil rights movement.
different. What's the civil rights movement about, Michelle?
The civil rights movement was about, well, it's in the
Civil.
name, civil rights.
Exactly. So, but
Right.
what I'm talking about is human rights. Because here's the thing, Michelle. If you don't have your human rights, who gives a fuck about your civil rights?
That's true.
Don't matter. So what I'm telling you, what I'm getting you, I'm trying to get you to understand. We haven't addressed the issue of our human rights being justified. As a people, as a movement, we have not properly situated the importance of our human rights.
That's because no one's pointed it out.
But I just told you Malcolm X already tried to do that. So it's not that no one's pointed it out. I just think that we've been positioned to focus on the so-called success of the civil rights movement. Every time that this state wants to champion protest and champion movement, it's always talking about what? The civil rights. So we've been kind of fed this so much that this is the only thing that we think about. But again, your civil rights don't matter if they don't recognize and honor your humanity.
True.
Shy, what you thinking? Shy, what you thinking? What you feeling?
So I I have a question. Why is it that Malcolm X, because I can't remember why, but I know that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King at one point they were friends, right? And then they had a falling out?
Not quite.
Or
I think Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were pitted against each other ideologically and from a standpoint of tactics. But as their lives evolved, they became more closer and they kind of seen things from the same prism. So I think it would be the opposite, right? They started off more as adversaries and developed a mutual respect for one another.
but would you think Martin Luther King would have if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were alive today, would Martin Luther King
Cut out, Michelle. While we wait for the pick back up, Danny, what you thinking? What you feeling? You still on mute? Danny, we waiting on you.
Sorry, my laptop died.
Okay. All right, no, all good, bro. Take your time. I see you're typing. But I'm sorry, you had a question, Michelle. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were still alive today, do you think Martin Luther King would eventually have what is it, shared Malcolm X's belief?
Um, I don't think it's beyond reason. I don't think that that's unreasonable. One of the things that Martin Luther King said before he was assassinated also, I'm afraid that I have integrated my children into a burning house. So what I hear from that is a critique on this notion of integration. Now, Malcolm X was a staunch believer in non-integration, right? Like doing for self. So to me, that kind of allows you to see how even Martin Luther King was kind of drifting closer to Malcolm's position. So I don't know if it will be a complete agreement. But then also, I don't even know if that is necessary, right? Sometimes it's good to have polar views on or polar approaches to addressing a problem. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
For Monday, I'm gonna post what the material will be. I think I'm gonna pivot from what's on our syllabus, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So I'll post some material for you by the end of day Saturday. I'm gonna try to get it up by Friday, and then I'll make an announcement on Canvas to inform you all what is the reading or the visual material to be discussed on Monday. So just kind of keep an eye out for that, and I'll post that for you all. Are there any